Ross. I'm CEO at the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce, and we're really happy to welcome all of you here today to one of our webinars. We've been hosting these a couple of times a week to help our members get on track and perhaps learn some new things that would be helpful to them as they work through this challenging time in business. I want to thank Porter O'Brien for being our host, our speakers today. They're a Fredericton-based communications agency. The partners in the firm are Jordan O'Brien and Tim Porter, and they say they have a combined 50 years experience in public relations, strategy, marketing, government relations, media research, and training, but I don't think they're old enough to have such a lengthy experience. There you go. You can pay me for that little gift later. Today their webinar is called Media Relations 101, and it's going to talk about how to convince the media to cover your story and how to make sure that your story has all the right elements so that it will be a great story to be covered. And also how to respond when the media calls unexpectedly. And I think many of us have been experiencing calls from the media who are looking to find good news stories from our local business community, but also some of the challenging stories that some of our members are facing. So today we'll learn about how to deal with that. So without any further ado, I turn it over to Jordan and to Tim. Thank you so much, and take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much, Krista, for having us. We're looking forward to it. As you mentioned, one of the things that we do is media training, and this is kind of a summarized version of our introductory media training course that we put on for clients. So Tim and I are going to tag team this and switch back and forth, and then we'd be happy to take any questions. So just about who we are, we're a relatively new company. We started late last year, but Tim and I have worked together for many years and have a lot of background in PR, public relations, strategy, marketing, government relations, market research, and media training. Those are kind of our 6 areas that we focus on. Then we, in addition to the 2 of us, we have a number of associates we work with on those areas. And so that's kind of who we are. And we're both based here in Fredericton. We have an office down on Queen Street, which we opened and then moved out of for the pandemic. So that's good. So I'll turn it over to Tim for the first bit, and then we'll alternate throughout the presentation.
Thank you, Jordan. And welcome, everyone. I realize these are challenging times, and this is a different mode of communication that we're all getting used to. And as Jordan said, this is a seminar that we conduct, maybe that is usually a day-long session with people, and we've kind of condensed it down into hopefully about half an hour, and then we can open it up for some questions and dialogue towards the end. But I did want to start, and usually when we start these things, and we spend a lot of time talking about perspectives on the news and what the role of the media is, and how we can help to serve both the agenda that the reporters are looking for, but also our own agenda. And one thing I like to start off with is just 5 things that hopefully you can keep in mind today, and that maybe we can come back to them at the end and see if they've kind of resonated with you a bit. And the first one I have here is tell the truth. That's a kind of a novel idea in this day and age, where truth and facts are challenged. Surprisingly enough, it's actually quite absurd to think that the truth is something that is something that has to be defined today, but it is. And so to be honest with yourself and to be truthful in the information that you deliver to the media, that is kind of the most important thing. The other things involve working on trying to convey your messages in the best way you can, to use facts at your arsenal, not just your opinion, and to deliver it in a manner that is effective. So often we tell people to slow down and don't rush your answers, and to try to deliver as smoothly as possible. And then also it's follow-up, is ensuring that if you don't know the answer to a question when you're posed, then get the answer and follow up and get back to reporters and work with them on your answer to make sure it's as complete as possible. So those are kind of things that we'll maybe come back to at the end. And then I'll start off by kind of defining, what is news, and news is something that's unusual or unique, that's different, that has a hook to it. So the classic example we learn in journalism school is that dog bites man isn't necessarily news, but man bites dog, that is news. It's something unusual. People die every day of various natural causes. That's not necessarily news. Where you find that is, they format it into a factual type of template into what we read every day as obituaries. So the facts are there, but it's not represented in the news pages unless it is of some unusual nature. So that's kind of an example of something that has to be just a little bit different for it to make it into the news, as opposed to just a regular type factual information. So kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking yourself, how do I get my business or my organization into the news? It has to be something that is just a little bit different, that has a little bit of a uniqueness to it, that will represent well and we'll talk about the various formats that can be used. So just like your organization or business, the media also, they have a job to do and they have a business to run. So, when I worked in newspapers, it was, the newspaper had its news division, but it also had its sales. So it was selling advertisements, and it was selling classifieds, and it was circulating, and that was where they were trying to make their money. The news itself was the commodity. So that's the product that you're trying to sell. So the news component is something that is a little bit unique, and they are basically trying to craft something that is accurately done, that is fairly done, that is transparent and compelling. It achieves some sort of balance. And also keep in mind, they are a business and they're trying to grow their market share and revenues and that sort of thing. So that's kind of from the media point of view, the business point of view. Jordan's going to talk a little bit about your own point of view in this.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So when you start off to, if what you have is news and you're going to be covered, you have options in terms of how you're going to present yourself. So for example, if it's television, you could go to the studio, they could come to you. If they come to you, you could be outside, you could be inside, you could be seated, you could be standing. Those sorts of things are generally, there's not one that's better. as a general rule, but there might be one that's better for you. If you're more comfortable sitting down, then arrange to be sitting down. For radio, if you're more comfortable being able to look somebody in the eye, go to the studio. If you're more comfortable being able to look very closely at your notes, do it by phone. Those sorts of things that's going to be unique to you. So think that through, that whatever you're going to be more comfortable, because the last thing you want to be is more stressed out than you have to be when you're doing an interview. Natural body language is important. Sometimes you see a lot of people with exaggerated hand gestures, getting in front of their face, looking, where are they looking? So you need to be natural. And then speak like a normal person, and keep in mind you're not talking to the reporter, you're talking to the reporter's audience. So using technical terms that somebody on the street or at the Tim Hortons isn't going to understand, it's not going to serve your purpose. You want to use normal words. You want to use you don't want to use acronyms that general people aren't going to understand. The example I like to use in New Brunswick is people that deal with government or are in government talk about pedal. To normal people, that's a part of a flower. It's not a government department responsible for education and training. So you want to use terms that the wide variety of people are going to understand, and you want to sound like a normal person. If you're sitting around the kitchen table, you're probably not talking in acronyms. You're going through the television to people's kitchen tables, and through the newspapers to their kitchen tables, to talk like you would in that context.
So we want to talk a little bit about how the media works. You're probably familiar with a number of positions and roles that reporters play. So, in newspapers, you have your editors, your publishers, and those people kind of supervise the activity of the newspaper. You and the business end of it, the publishing end of it. You have your reporters and columnists that are probably more on the ground, that are talking to you, calling you up. In radio, in TV, it would be more kind of producers that would call you and try to line you up and for interviews with reporters or anchors or people who will ultimately be conducting the interview. So there are a number of layers of people that you'll be interacting with. And in social media, there's still there's a lot of activity that in social media that will bleed over into mainstream stories. So you'll find now that a lot of debate and a lot of comments that come forward on social media, the journalists are now reading that and will represent that into their new stories. So it is a very fluid kind of situation where the comment almost comes out even before the news story. There are also areas that are developing now that are a little different. People that are kind of their own reporters. So you see community type reporting going on, and that could be represented in such things as podcasts and various things on the internet. I guess there are different ways that you as an organization can interact and engage with the media. One is just by building relationships with them, by talking to them, approaching reporters and making some dialogue with them, so they know you outside of the context of a story. So they kind of see you as a contact, a person that they can call up when they need a source of information. You may look on it. Your organization may feel comfortable with inviting reporters in for what we would call a media tour, and you can take them on a tour of your organization. There are, of course, very formal settings like news conferences. There are more informal settings, which we refer to as scrums, where a person is kind of standing in an informal area, and the reporters will congregate around and ask questions to an individual. There might be photo ops where you just invite cameras in to take pictures and represent that way. You could visit a media outlet and talk to the bosses there, and that's what we generally call like an editorial board meeting, where in a newspaper you would talk to the editors that produce the editorials. And there are often in broadcast, there would be like executive producers that you could meet with and talk to as well. Basically, you can issue a news release or call up and pitch a story. Basically, a news release is an invitation to the media to talk to you, and it's not just the end piece. Like some people will issue a news release and then they won't answer their phone afterwards or dialogue afterwards. That's kind of the opposite of the intent of it. The intent of a news release is to invite coverage on a given subject. So you should be responsive, ready to respond to that sort of thing. You may seek sponsorship is another way where you might pay to have your logo represented or sponsor an event. And you engage with also through social media dialogue would be another way. There are different styles of interviews. There are live interviews. There are taped interviews that you would do. There may be in studio type things. There may be outside studio where you kind of do a stand-up interview outside of maybe your business, that sort of thing. Over the phone is quite popular, particularly with newspapers will just require a phone call. There may be call-in shows that you participate in. Panel discussions might be another, where you go on radio and you talk. There's maybe 3 different business people talking on a perspective. You might be, surprised at kind of an ambush, and we'll talk about ways to kind of address that sort of thing. But you're walking down the street and they put a microphone in your face, that sort of thing. Other ways might be technical briefings, where you might have a very technical issue that you're trying to communicate, and it's not necessarily something that you want to do a news conference on, but it's something you want to give a lot of background on, so you might organize just an hour-long session where you describe the technicalities of your announcement. So those are just the kind of a few examples of the types of engagement that you may encounter.
Thanks, Tim. So once you've encountered that and you're ready to do the interview, how you want to prepare, the first thing you can do is negotiate some things. There are some things you can negotiate with reporters or their editors or producers. You might want to negotiate if there's certain things that you can't talk about. You might want to try to ask them to not ask you those questions that you can't answer. If you give them a good rationale as to why you can't answer, they may agree to do that. Timing. If they're going to interview 2 or 3 people, would you like to have the first word or the last word? You can sometimes negotiate that. If you're going on a morning radio show and you're not a morning person, then maybe you want to negotiate the last slot as opposed to the first slot. Those sorts of things. Then of course, the most important thing you're going to do is develop your message. You want to know what you're going to talk about, and just as importantly, know what you don't want to talk about. So very important to write the stuff down, to think it through, to have some key points that you can have in front of you or commit to memory to go back to, and also to think through the sorts of questions you might get asked and how you would answer those questions. Once you've done that, you need to rehearse. If you were in a drama club in high school, you didn't memorize your lines and then utter them for the first time when you walked out on stage in front of a live audience. You rehearsed. So you get a colleague, get your spouse, your friend to read through some of the questions you've thought of and practice your answers. How do you do? Do you stumble over your words? If you use a certain term, maybe you want to change that term. Those sorts of things. Then when you get to the studio, or you're about to dial in on the phone for a phone interview, you need to relax. You want to be, particularly if you don't do it very often, it's very stressful. So you want to minimize that stress. So, if you want to take your shoes off, if you want to have a stretch, if you want to take some breaths, get a glass of water, those sorts of things, so that you're ready to go forward on your best foot.
So, staying on message, I guess, one of the things we like to talk about is when you go into an interview, you have to know your goal. You have to know your messages. You have to be prepared. And that, I guess, is, one of the key things, to stay focused, to drive home your messages and repeat them. To move quickly from answering questions to your main message, and use the opportunity that they give you to deliver your message in the most succinct way that you can. And remember that you will likely be edited. And so you got to keep that in mind, that when you deliver your answers, it may be represented in a very short, tight frame. And one of the other things we'd like to coach people on is, to speak kind of from the heart, and don't speak in a very corporate kind of way. Kind of have your message delivered in a very normal way that you would normally speak, and that is brings some authenticity to your interview, and I guess it's trying to be as focused and as succinct as you possibly can.
Some of the techniques that you want to do when you're in the interview, these are do's and don'ts, I guess, or don'ts and do's is more the order that they are. Avoid the negative. If you're speaking on a controversial issue, often the reporter will try to get you to admit some fault and admit some wrong, and you want to avoid things like, if the reporter says, why didn't you think of this? Why didn't you do this? Don't repeat that back to them. So instead of saying, if you say something to the effect of, Well, I don't agree that we weren't prepared. I think we were well prepared. Well, that allows them to report the story that Jordan O'Brien denies that they weren't prepared. That's very negative. So flip it on its head. Always speak from positive content. So why weren't you prepared? Well, it's actually we spent a lot of time on preparation, and we did this and we did this and we did this. So you don't want to deny things. You don't want to repeat the negative. And then there's no comment is a bad thing to say. I have no comment. We have no comment. That sounds evasive. It sounds like maybe it's something to hide. It's okay if you can't comment on something, but give the real reason why. Don't just deny comment without any context. Say, well, I really wish I could speak to you about that, but unfortunately the Privacy Act prevents us from doing that. Unfortunately, we've got a number of shareholders that we need to talk to about that. We need to speak to them first. We haven't had a chance to speak to them yet, or whatever. Give a reason and a legitimate reason. Other thing is don't take the bait. So reporters often will come to an interview looking for a particular quote, and they will try to get you to say what they want you to say to fill out their story, and you might not want to say that. So they may come back around at it 3 or 4 or 5 different ways. They may say something very leading. So if it's not a live interview on television or radio, what the reporter says is never reported. So the reporter can say some outrageous things to try to elicit a response to you, and when that's played as a clip or quoted in the newspaper, the readers and the listeners have no idea what question elicited that answer. They just hear your answer. So don't take the bait. Stay on your message. Don't get shaded, angry, or thrown off guard by aggressive questions. Focus on your message. Stay positive, and that will serve you well.
So bridging is a technique that you're probably familiar with. You've probably heard it. It's when a interviewer will move from the reporter's question to their main message. So you turn what would sometimes be maybe a very awkward or negative question into a much more positive answer. So you directly answer the question, and then you kind of move to the bridge of your own message. So you kind of put their question into perspective. Maybe you use a word that is used in the question to bridge over to your answer. But you keep in mind that your main purpose for the interview is to get your message out. So you look at their question, you consider their question, you try to address their question in the best way you can, but you also try to move directly into the purpose that you want to get out of the interview. So you don't allow the interviewers question that might be laden with kind of their own opinion or their own perspective to bring it over back into your perspective. So, there are different ways that you can do this. And I have a whole list of different ways, but, examples might be, let me answer your question by giving you some background. You're really asking me if, kind of examples like that. The real question is, you kind of bring it over into where you want to go. I can't speculate on that, but what I can say is this. So those are all kind of things that you would work on, in an exercise kind of format. That if we had a day, we could drill you on that sort of thing. So in terms of other things, in terms of your answers, I guess one of the things we advise is that people don't allow the interviewer just to take over and force you to give answers that you don't want to give. So one technique that interviewers sometimes do is they just kind of stop talking, they stop asking you, and they just give you an opportunity to keep talking. And that's often a dangerous kind of territory. So make them kind of ask you the question, and keep them going. And the other thing is, if you aren't doing an on-camera type interview, then feel free, in a radio type format to have your notes and have your facts in front of you and be able to refer to them as you're speaking. So the final slide here, where we're kind of wrapping up, is just to talk a little bit about follow-up and evaluation. So it's very important to kind of take a read of the media reporting that's done after you do an interview, and ensure that the facts are being represented correctly. Monitor the radio, monitor the newspaper to see that your interview is factually represented. It's not an occasion where you can argue all points, but certainly facts. You can follow up with reporters to make sure that your message is getting out. And also, I guess on social media, often you have to make sure that the comments on your article are fair to you, so you can engage in social media to ensure that your message is understood, and that your message isn't getting misrepresented in any way.
Yeah, so on that point that Tim's talking about, you can correct facts. So if the story comes out and there's a factual error, you can call the reporter and explain why. They'll correct that for you. But another thing that's a little more subjective is message effectiveness, and that's a way for you to evaluate yourself. So you went out to deliver a message. Is what you wanted been reported? And if not, did you go down on a tangent and say something that wasn't core to your message that the media hooked onto? Was your message too confusing or not interesting? And so those are things that you can do to better prepare yourself for the next time. If you didn't get your message out effectively, what did you do wrong? What could you do differently next time? Social media engagement, Tim talked about a bit, in terms of people will share these news stories and then there will be comments underneath them, and you want to make sure that if you have the capacity and it's a good opportunity to get in there and engage with some people. The other thing you can do though is to see if you've talked to the media and it's a good news story, then hopefully it's going to grow your business. So you can share positive stories on your social media channels. You can watch and see whether you're getting more visits to your Facebook page, to your LinkedIn page as a result of an interview. And then are you getting more foot traffic into your business, more phone calls, etc. And you can assume that if there's a big uptick in business after you've done an interview, that might be related to the interview in an informal way, or you may want to ask your employees after you're expecting a bunch of media coverage to just for 48 or 72 hours to ask customers, oh, what brought you here today? How did you hear about us? Just to see whether or not the media and engagement that you've done was effective.
So, obviously we're in a very unique time, and I guess this time is very important for you to remain engaged, recognizing that businesses are struggling to keep afloat, to keep a footprint that they've had, to not lose ground. So in this time, I guess it's important for you to do as much as you can to let people know that you're still in business and that you are operating. And that can be done in simple ways. So there are obviously ways that you can advertise. You can talk a little bit about maybe efforts you're doing that are unique in this time. So maybe you're doing business in a much different way than you did before. We see stories to that effect today, where businesses are talking about how they're doing things differently to reach out to people in a different way. Also, there might be some social engagement that you can do, where you are supportive of efforts that others are doing. Maybe there are other charitable organizations that you support or follow and that you want to recognize. And so it's I guess a time where it's important for you to stay relevant, and for you to make sure that your business is not forgotten. And there's a lot of important work being done either by businesses or nonprofits, and people appreciate reading those stories in this time. So at that, Jordan, I think we're going to open it up to any questions that people may have, and probably there are questions about how you can do things differently in the times we're living in.
So Tanya, are you going to moderate questions, or how do we want to?
I can do that if you'd like.
Okay.
So first of all, thank you very much. That was really helpful. I took a lot of notes. But that being said, might we ask if these slides can be made available to the participants?
Yeah, I think Tanya has a copy, and if she wants to distribute them, that's fine with us.
So folks on the line, if you would like to receive a copy of that, I guess actually Tanya is probably going to send it out to everybody who's registered. We've also recorded this session, and we'll be posting that on our YouTube channel, and also I believe we'll be sharing it on our social media. So if you'd like to ask a question, if you look down at the bottom under participants, when you click on that, it gives you the option. You can see on the right all of the participants, and you can raise your hand. So if you would like to ask a question, probably the best thing to do is raise your hand. Tanya can unmute you, and we'll go from there. So I added a question in the chat just while people are thinking about the questions they'd like to ask, because I don't see any hands raised yet. My question was, sometimes the media will ask the chamber for a written comment or to answer a quick question in writing, and then in print it sounds somewhat evasive. It says that, the chamber provided a written statement. So it sounds like we weren't willing to speak, or that we offered them a canned written statement, but it's actually what they requested. So is there a way to respond to that request for something in writing that doesn't then sound like, we were being evasive? Can you help us out with that one?
Yeah, Krista, I mean, that type of format's, cropped up over the last 10 or 20 years, where people are very used to now communicating by email. But you are losing, I guess, an opportunity to speak with reporters and talk to them. And often what I would advise is to definitely call up the reporter and talk to them about their story, about what the information that they're looking for may be, because you're right. The email type prepared answer looks a little bit evasive, and it's always better, I think, to give a more authentic type of answer that always represents much better. They may be, confined to time, where they have a certain period of time where they need to get information, and they want to do it quickly. So that may be the reason why, they're just asking you for an email. But I mean, it's a two-way street. So if you feel that you want to communicate information in a more rounded way, in a more full way, please feel free, I think, to open up that dialogue and speak and talk and try to come to a negotiated type of settlement on how you will communicate.
Okay. So do we have any other questions out there? I see on our call, we've got a number of people that I know do talk to the media from time to time in regards to their business or some of their perhaps association work that they do. I see Ron Marcolin on there. Did you have a question, Ron? Your hand's not raised, but let me unmute your mic. There you go.
Yes, I did. And I guess two pieces of this. First of all, thank you very much for this. It certainly filled in the blanks for me. I guess I just wanted to talk briefly about patience. I find, you plant some stories or you bring out a press release or a report that we do at our association, and then you wait patiently. And of course, some days are hard-hitting news days, and obviously they wouldn't pick up the story that we're sending out. But other days are all over it. Can you sort of speak somewhat to the flow of stories? I find sometimes 2 or 3 or even days later, or even a week later, they pick up a story. Can you sort of compartmentalize some of the stories, if you could? Like, I mean, business stories, generally speaking, seems to me, because I'm a business person, they would be more at the top. But is that just the way I'm thinking? Because I think our business stories in general should always be at the top. Or can you give us a bit of a sense of a pecking order of stories, loosely described?
Yeah, you've got to pick the a date that is best for everyone, and often the day that's good for you, in the context of what might be going on in the province or in the world, it doesn't work out. So what I would often do if I have a story to communicate, I would pick up the phone and start talking to a few producers or reporters, talk to them about what days it would be best to start to communicate with them, to start to deal with them. They might have an agenda. There might be other things going on where you could negotiate. Often, if you talk to them, maybe there's a particular radio station or TV station or newspaper that you would most want to be represented in, that you would begin the discussion with them to ensure that your timing meshes with the timing that they can bring a story forward. So you may come to an arrangement where you give them kind of advanced information or exclusive information, and they can prepare it in advance and release it like on the day that you negotiate, like say a Friday or something, and then you kind of issue a press release to everyone else thereafter. But yeah, often just sending out a press release isn't enough. It does require that extra phone call, that extra negotiation to make sure you get out there. Because as I started out, I talked, they're looking for something unique, something that's a hook, something that's relevant to, maybe a current event that's going on. And if you can feed into that hook, then that'll make you more successful.
Folks, it's nice when we're doing the Q&A, if you're feeling up to it, maybe you turn your cameras on so we can all see who we're talking to, but that's entirely up to you. I see most of us, our cameras are off. I do have a couple of questions that showed up here in the chat, Jordan and Tim. One is from Kathleen Bowden. It says, how do you proactively build a relationship with a reporter and manage that relationship over time? What are the benefits and what are the drawbacks?
Gordon, do you want to try?
Yeah, I'll take a run at that one. It can really depend on the context of what's your role with an organization, and how often are you going to engage with the media. It's a little awkward if you're somebody that appears in the news once a year. It's difficult. But if you're somebody like the Chamber of Commerce, for example, who would be in the paper or the news all the time or very often, and would be somebody that would be regularly sought after for comment and reaction, you can call a reporter when you've got something coming, invite them to come by the office, invite them to go for a coffee, just to kind of say, look, over the next few weeks, we're going to have this report and we're going to have this guest speaker, and we just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And you just kind of have that back and forth. You need to usually have a reason to call a reporter. And that might be, oh, I've just recently taken over as the spokesperson for this organization. I just wanted to stop by as a courtesy. Those sorts of things. You got to be very careful, depending on what kind of organization you work with, that anything you say may be used against you, as they say in the Miranda warning. Eventually, over time, you may build a relationship with a reporter where you can feel comfortable speaking off the record, but that's never a given. Just because you say this is off the record and then you start spilling your guts, if the reporter didn't agree that it was off the record, it's not off the record. You do need to take some care, but I think it would vary a lot. If you're somebody that makes news, it's going to be a very different approach than if you're somebody that reporters call to get a reaction to news. But I mean, they're people, and they're also, many of them are overworked. I mean, when I worked as a communications officer for government, 12, 15 years ago, just Brunswick News had 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 reporters in the legislative press gallery alone, and now they've got 2 or 3, and they're producing the same amount of content. So these guys are busy too. So if you can make their job easier by, letting them know, look, here's my cell phone number. I just wanted to reach out to you because I can talk on this, this, and this, and I have my phone on me all the time. So if you need a quick quote, give me a call. They really appreciate that. You see often the same people being quoted over and over and over again for reaction. That's because those are the people that they can get a hold of the easiest and have a quick interview with and get what they need. So you can do that sort of thing as well.
So I have, we have about, I believe, 10 minutes left, and we have 3 questions here. So I'll do the questions quickly, and maybe we can have some quick answers on these ones so we can cover them all. So Andrew asks, and I agree with this question. Andrew says, in my limited experience, the reporter will call you with his or her story already sketched out. They're seeking only a quote. In other words, the reporter knows what he wants or she wants, and you are in the dark. How do you deal with these hidden agendas?
Okay, so I guess that goes back to negotiation again. So when the reporter calls, it's quite fine for you to ask what their story is and what are the what's the type of information they're seeking. So to give a little bit of a background and to ask them the perspective that they're calling you on. Often they're not just speaking to you, but they're talking to a number of individuals on a story. So you try to assess, what your role in that may be. So you can tailor your message accordingly, and that's often where it's important to keep your answers very tight and to the point, and don't stray off topic. To try to keep it as succinct as you possibly can. But I would say definitely ask some questions, right off the top, as to what the type of story that they're trying to put together.
I think it's fair to ask who else they're interviewing. And also, sometimes I get asked to comment on reports, which I haven't seen. So it's fair to say, I'd like to see that report and I need some time to review it. And they're usually very accommodating, I find. So the next question is from Eric. Could you comment on the trend for some media outlets, perhaps the publicly funded one, finding a negative comment, a negative angle on every story as clickbait? Any tips for encouraging telling the positive story? How do we help the reporter get the story clicks they're looking for and still keep it positive? That's a great question.
Yeah, I think Tim covered this a little bit in the presentation about not everything is news. It needs to have a hook. It needs to be interesting. And controversy often makes it very easy to make a story interesting. So if you've got a positive story, you've just got to work extra hard to come up with the creative angle, find something really novel, something that somebody's going to read and say, oh, I would never have known that. That's the sort of thing that's going to grab a reporter's attention. And sometimes it's difficult with a positive story. It's kind of the same thing in customer service. People don't go out of their way to call and say, geez, I was by your store today and I had the greatest service of my life. But they're much more likely to give you a call and say, geez, I was at your store today and holy frig, you got a real jerk working on the cash. You should do something about that. And it's the same thing with news. Controversy does sell. So there's a lot more effort required to make positive newsy, interesting, and have a hook. So just go through it. Maybe even go with somebody. It's sometimes hard with your own stuff to figure that out. So get somebody that is not of your organization to take a look at something and what did you find most interesting about this, and put that in the forefront of your message.
There's one question here still in the queue. I'm going to throw a comment in, if you don't mind, that follows up on what you just said, Jordan. Ron Marcolin with CME is on our call. He asked the first question, and I would suggest that it's great to make friends of other similar organizations or complementary companies. So if you get asked for a media comment, a great thing to do is to provide that, but also to say, you might want to talk to, my colleague, Ron Marcolin over at the CME, because they're also involved in this project, or they're also engaged in this work, or what have you. What I have found is when we can share the opportunity for other organizations or other companies to provide their message, often they're much more likely to do the same in reverse. Ron and I have tossed the ball back and forth a few times. So I would encourage businesses to consider that as well. If you are asked to comment on, what you're doing during COVID, and of another company that might be doing something interesting, share that, because often that will come back around. So the last question that's on here is from Elizabeth, and this is a great question. Our province seems to be doing an excellent job with the daily afternoon press conferences for COVID-19 updates. What would you identify as the top 3 tips or strategies or best practices that they are using?
So one of the things that is probably the best thing they're doing is delivering factual information every day. And they're doing it every day. So they're providing facts, which are a baseline, and we can see the progress that we're making, as a province every day, and that's kind of bearing fruit right now this week, where we have very low numbers of new cases in the last week, and we can celebrate that a little bit in the fact that we've seen it over the course of 30 days of solid information, where we saw numbers go up, and now the numbers are going down, and the fact, I guess, it also from the perspective of the organization that's doing it, the government, it gives them a very good sense in the public that they're on top of the job, and that they're doing the job and they're seen to be doing the job. And I guess that's, one of the important things when it comes to people feeling that their government is doing the best that the job they can for them because they see them doing it every day. They're also it's also a way, once you establish that fact line, that baseline of fact, then people begin to trust you more. So when they have to deliver a difficult message that impugns upon people, that tells people that they can't do something, then they are seen to have the respect of the public, and that the public will follow them in what they are advising. So it gives them more credibility.
So facts and being very consistent, I think it's also been helpful that they've had two main spokespersons and they haven't strayed from that very much, and that's helped us to know what to expect. Candace Arsenault says, I feel they're delivering facts with a degree of emotion that makes their message relatable and trustworthy, and I've felt that as well. They're very calm, very pragmatic, very practical, and they make us feel calm, and I think that's been a positive thing. So we've got about 2 minutes left. Would either of you like to say a bit of a closing comment, and then I'm gonna tie it up?
Sure. Well, I just want to thank everybody for their attention. I know we've all got a lot on the go, and to give us an hour of your time is great. I wouldn't be a very good businessman if I didn't put out the pitch that we do have the full meal deal version of this that we could put you through or your team through, and we would be happy to entertain any calls or emails on that. And just thanks again. It was a kind of a fun way to spend the morning and to keep seeing faces and meeting people and moving along in this unusual time. So thank you all very much for taking the time today.
So thank you, Jordan, and thanks, Tim, for this presentation. Thank all of you, too, for participating. We appreciate it. On Thursday, we have a networking event. If you haven't got the details of that or haven't signed up, you can check it out on our website, on our calendar. And as well, on Monday of next week, we have our next webinar, which is Navigating Unprecedented Change, which is being presented by Deloitte. So again, thank you so much, Jordan and Tim. You did a great job today. And I'm sure that some of those on the line will be calling you at some point for some personalized help. So thanks again. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.